I just keep hearing the Lord say, if he's forgiven me, how can I not forgive you? I just felt like the Lord said, Liz, I've forgiven you. Will you walk out forgiveness for him?
So can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Liz, and I have a new life in Christ, and I'm in recovery for people-pleasing, control, and pride.
So tell me about your childhood.
Yeah, growing up, my parents divorced when I was young. I was about, I think, 2 or 3, and we left. I was born in Ohio, and we left Ohio when I was 3 and moved to California. And my mom got married when I was about 5, remarried, and so I had a step family. We were never allowed to say step in our house. It was only what you walked up. And so they were my brothers and sisters, and I had a stepfather. And that's how it was all the way through until I left the house when I was 18. But I didn't have my dad. The other side of my family that we left, I did not have growing up, and so there was definitely this missing part, being able to see my stepfather and his daughter have a relationship and not have that. That was really hard. Even seeing other daughters and dads and their relationships, that really impacted me growing up. And so not having my father there played this story out of me seeking something that felt was missing.
So when you moved, did he just split and had no contact with you?
Yeah, so we moved, and my dad was, I believe, on drugs at that time. I think that was part of the move of just like safety, and there was just a disconnect at that time, and he chose other things. And so he would randomly come in the picture, oftentimes when there was a new girlfriend or there was somebody new. They wanted to play house, or she did, and so she wanted to meet me, and so I'd get this random phone call introducing me to whoever, and from there, like, those were the times I would end up talking to him, but he was pretty much absent in that whole time growing up.
Tell me about, like, California as a young kid. Like, what was this like?
Yeah, so California as a young kid, Ohio was always the place where family was, and so I did have this yearning to go back to Ohio. It felt like I was missing out on this childhood that was back there because we had other family there. And so I always just remember, like, wanting to go. Like, I wanted to go there. There was even a time that my mom kind of lifted her hands and said go, and I went and lived with my aunt and uncle and my cousin for a time frame. And I'm not sure that was really good too, because that still felt like I was leaving. The next closest thing to me was my mom. And so I had left my dad wasn't a part of the picture, and then my mom, I'm leaving her to go to this family back there. And I think to a kid, what you don't have is what's missing. And so that was the way that I fulfilled that. But when I got there, I realized that wasn't what I needed. It wasn't what, it wasn't all it was cracked up to be, I should say. What I had imagined was not the family that was there. And so there was still such a searching of, like, okay, what am I missing?
So how long were you there?
I was probably there, I think, 3 or 4 months. It was kind of a start of the summer, see how I did. I started school there, and then I think one of the teachers pulled my mom aside and said, this isn't the best for her. She needs to be back with my mom, essentially, and my family back in California. And so I went back 4 months later.
So as you go back, like, around what age were you?
When I went there, I think it was 8 or 9. I think third or fourth grade. I think around third or fourth grade was a lot of transition in my life. It was a lot of searching of, like, I don't have a dad. I want my dad. His family's back there. My mom's family was back there. I want family. I think I always felt like this kid looking at the family I had, since my stepfather had 3 kids. My mom married into this family, and being kind of feeling, they never made me feel this way, but just a feeling of this wasn't my family. This, like, my family was back there. Yeah, I love my brothers and sisters very, very much. It felt like I was on the outside looking in. I really believe there was, because there was that father-daughter relationship that my sister had with her dad and that I got to see. And there was definitely a difference of my relationship with my stepfather, as we had a lot of issues growing up.
Did you guys grow up in church?
We did grow up in church. My mom had a relationship with the Lord, and even from a young age, she always told me about Jesus, and just really told me the story of the gospel. And so we went to church. I remember going to kindergarten, Sunday school, and then growing up in this church. And then this church is where I stayed until 18 years old. They played the church itself. I met Christ at summer camp, or not summer camp, I'm sorry, winter camp. And really that whole thing of searching as a little girl and not having a dad, it was given that Christ desired to be our father. And so when that invitation was given, I just remember tears running down my face, and me going up to the front stage saying, what are you talking about? There's a God that desires to be my father. And from there on, a lot of things changed in my life.
How old were you at that camp?
This was between 8 and 9 years old.
So was that camp when you got back to California?
It was, yeah.
What does that look like after?
So after accepting Christ, I was still, church became a big part of my life, going to church on Wednesdays, on Sunday mornings, Sunday nights, sometimes without my family. There was a time I remember that my brother and I would ride our bikes to church, and then we'd ride our bikes home because our parents had other things going on at that time. And then reading my Bible, praying. I just started seeing the Lord start showing up in my life in different ways of providing, and things just in life just started to be different.
You know, I always think like so much is formed in those teenage years. Like, what were your teenage years looking like?
My teenage years, the first, I would say, when I was 12 or 13 was really hard. Just I think growing up, middle school's always not the best years, but it's kind of hard. Hold on. I think I questioned a lot of my identity during those years. And God was so faithful in those years, and that was a time that I started realizing who I was in Christ. And God was always there. Even when man was fallible or man let me down, God never let me down. And so whether it was problems at home, whether it was difficulties, whether it be at school, there was a lot of time during those years that I was just learning on who my identity in Christ was. When my mom remarried, she married my stepfather, and he was mentally abusive and emotionally abusive. He was an alcoholic, and he also had addictions of other sorts. And so my relationship with him over the years was very much strained from always, I shouldn't say always, I should say not feeling safe and secure oftentimes. I think as I got older, looking back, that safety and security was something that was really, really important to me. And I didn't feel safe as a kid or secure. And so I remember we go back to those teenage years of not really wanting to be around. There was a lot of things I was fearful of. And, even so much so that there was a night that I was in my room, and I was really just struggling with identity and who I was. I just also had questions of, I accepted God, but there was a lot of things going on in my life that I didn't understand. And I had seen him be faithful up to this point, but I still couldn't understand um, just with the stepfather and the issues I had with him and um, these things going on that I remember going to my room and I just felt really, really alone. And so a situation happened, and I remember just my mom coming in and talking to me about it. And she's like, just need to pray and ask God to meet you in this place. And it was a dark place for me. Like, I just remember I didn't want to be alive. Um, I think I still struggled from my dad being gone. I'm a teenager and just really struggling with my identity and who I was. And so I feel like it was a wrestling moment, a Jacob moment in the Bible where he's kind of wrestling. And I remember the Lord meeting me in my room that night. And I know you're not supposed to test God. It's part of the test story, though. And I said, God, if you're here, I need a sign. And this was like 2:00 in the morning, and all of a sudden someone's alarm clock in our house just went blaring. So much so my mom jumped up and she went running just to make sure like the kids were okay. And she came in and I said, Mom, you'll never guess what happened. I prayed and asked if God was right here. I just needed him to be here and I needed a sign. And this radio just comes blaring. And so she just starts talking to me, and that was a pivotal moment in my relationship with Christ. God showed himself that night to me. And from there, things changed. That's when I was in my Bible continuously. That's when felt like me and God in life. His provisions, there were people in my life that came in things that weren't provided. Like your family usually provides you stuff, but when you don't have that family, there were things like braces being put on my teeth by the dentist who said he would do it because my parents couldn't afford it. There were people that would come in and take these roles. I remember even seeing just healthy family. There was a relationship in high school that I was a part of, and that family loved me so, so well. And I got to see things from sitting down at the dinner table and having dinner together, to a brother-sister relationship with their parents. They had both of their parents. And I just remember taking these little pearls from different places I collected and were like, that's the type of family I want to have. And so even though I felt abandoned, even though I felt kind of struggled with who I was, God showed me in so many different ways along the way that he was there. And I took all of these little pearls to what I wanted to do when I had a family.
That's awesome. And tell me like how your faith was just strengthening through those years.
I would say just really just having a relationship with God, and I going to church, Sunday school, being a part of ministry in high school, just having those relationships of community on the outside. I think even just that identity component of knowing who I was versus not knowing who I was before in Christ had changed the confidence level I had, how I walked. Yeah.
So tell me, so your husband said you guys met in high school?
We did, yes.
Tell me about meeting him. And
So we met when I was a freshman in high school and he was a junior, and I really liked him. We were both in sports, and we started to do stuff together, but my brother had scared him off because he said that juniors shouldn't be dating freshmen. And I would love to say that my brother did it because he was being protective of me. There was no protection at that moment. He was just trying to be a pain in my life. And so Paul kind of went his own way and I went my own way, and I had a long-term relationship of about 4 years with a boyfriend at that time. And when I graduated high school, Paul and I kind of reconnected. That boyfriend and I had broken up. And I had told you before that safety and security was always super important. And we joke that Paul and I kind of found ourselves in this place that he desired family because he was in the Navy and was away often. And I was looking for the safety, security. And so when we reconnected, we were those people for each other. And then we got married super quick.
So you guys how old were you guys when you got married?
I was 19 and he was 21.
And did you move?
I moved from California. He was already out here, and I moved from California to Norfolk.
Okay. So tell me about like early married years
Yeah, early married years were a little bit rough. I came from a church that I had been at for probably 12, 13 years and came out here and I didn't know anybody and we didn't have community, and back home I had a lot of community. And so there was times I felt alone. There were times that we got involved in things like going out at night together, being a part of crowds that were a different community than what I had back at home. And I just kind of started letting go of what walking with the Lord looked like. I ended up getting pregnant probably about 6 months after we got married. We got married in March. I found out I was pregnant that following September. And so our lives happened very quick. Everything felt like it was really, really quick. And so he deployed shortly after that. And for that time early on, he was gone for deployments, and then he'd be home for a short time and then gone again. We did 9 deployments over the course of 23 years.
So how many kids did you guys have?
Then at the early years, we had 1 kid.
Okay.
So we had our oldest, Cheyenne, and she was actually born in California because he was deployed at that time. And Shy is kind of our miracle baby. She was born with 3 holes in her heart. She was not promised 24 hours. They actually took her from me and put her in a Trauma 5 children's hospital and gave me a picture of her. And Paul was out to sea at this time. And so, again, that's where I could have found myself alone, yet God was faithful just with the community he surrounded us with, and the relationship back at home that we had. And so she ended up, through prayer, people coming around, ended up being good.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Wow. What are these years leading up looking like for your family?
Our marriage, when we were young, it's kind of a blur. I do remember this part in marriage, though, is there was something I was missing. I did feel alone, and I remember that I craved my relationship with God that I felt like I left when I left California. There was almost a part of me, I know God goes with us, but when I left California, I felt like I was free, I was young, I was going to get married, and 1 to 2 years in, marriage looked very different than what I had expected. And so there was a part that I did feel alone. Paul wasn't there for part of it. We had a daughter who was born and who had issues, and I just felt myself needing a spiritual leader. I actually felt myself needing God. And I associated that kind of to, oh, well, I need my husband to be a spiritual leader, yet it was my walk wasn't close with the Lord. And so I started kind of digging back in with my relationship with God. I remember praying, and I shared this earlier that, God, I just need a spiritual leader. And I heard this song about Lead Me. And I had literally, we were going over a bridge, and I had a tear come down my cheek. And it was like I felt that prayer leave my mouth and hit God's ears. There was something about it. I would never know 5 years later, we would be in a difficult situation where I'd be questioning whether I was going to stay or not.
I I guess that does lead us to this whole incident. Like, I want to hear it from your perspective.
Yeah. Paul and I were the best of friends. So before I kind of give the story, I want to make sure that this picture is painted accurately, because a lot of times you hear um, that when there's infidelity or pornography, that the person was absent or they weren't there. And one of the things is Paul and I were actually the best of friends. We weren't the best husband and wife. There was emotional disconnection, but he was an amazing friend at that point, and he was a good dad, and that was something. He wasn't absent when he was home. He was home. I wasn't wondering where he was, but there was definitely things missing from our marriage.
So tell me
How the whole situation
Yeah.
happened. Yeah. So one night I was at a PTA event for our oldest daughter, and I walked into the house, and the house was really quiet and the lights were on, and I was like, he must have gone to bed. And so I kind of shut off the lights, and I walked back to our bedroom, and I walked in, and I saw Paul. He was sitting up in bed against the wall, but he like had his phone. And I know this description is important, because what happens when you fall asleep is your muscles usually give way, right? Like you're asleep. And I came in, and it was like he was stiff as a board, and he was just holding his phone out. And I walked over, I remember this very clearly. I walked over to the dresser, and I went to take my jewelry off to go put him into bed. And when I took my jewelry off, I felt, the only thing I can explain is it felt like a tunnel of peace came over my body, that I shuddered at that moment. And I remember kind of like shaking, like you get the chills. And I was like, what was that? So I went across the bed, went across to the other side, and I went to put him in bed, because he's just sitting up, just straight as a board and asleep. And so I was just shocked by the whole thing. And so when I grabbed his phone and I hit his phone, of course I saw these images that I didn't want to see. And the old me, this is kind of the joke from it, but it had to have been God's peace that came upon me, because how I handled it at that moment, seeing what I saw, was not how I would have handled it. I slightly shook him. I woke him up, and I said, I think there's something we need to talk about. And at that moment, I used the illustration like God put him to sleep, and God woke him up, and immediately the sin of the lies of the stuff he had been walking with, carrying, had finally been broken more. It was the Lord that broke it. It wasn't him coming out. But he was a broken man at my feet. Like, he was crying. He was shameful. He actually went to the back of the backyard, I remember, and he was just sobbing. But at that moment, I wasn't ready to carry the load in which he was ready to transfer to me. So he left that night. And I remember getting the kids and going to my parents' house. And there was a lot of things. I didn't sleep for 24 hours. We called our church here. They were great to offer the support. We talked to pastors, all of that, and they were a lot of help. But I remember in those first 24 hours, just like, I need somebody to tell me they've been through this and they've made it. And there wasn't that person. And so it was over the next couple of days that things would look different, because I was done at that moment. I would like to say that it was something in my own strength to say, oh, I'll stay, I'll do this. But I had the lawyer plan to go see the next day. I had the realtor coming a couple of days. Like, I went kind of in type A mode of making sure everything was secure, but there wasn't an anger. That's why I say God's peace was a part of this whole story, because I was very sad. I was hurt. And I went through my emotions over the course of the next several weeks. But God knew what he was doing when he exposed what had been taking place. After I saw his phone, the only thing I thought at that moment was, we have an issue with pornography. And I had a stepfather that also had an issue with pornography. And So when I saw that, it immediately took me back to things I struggled with as a kid, and so it was just something I wasn't gonna do. Actually, I didn't have patience for it at that time, and so Paul at that moment felt free. It's like when you go through something like this, the weight that they carry kind of shifts to the next person to carry because everything's exposed for them and everything's out. And so this weight was shifted to me. And yeah, I just remember that I wasn't, I wasn't gonna stay.
Tell me about the conversations that took place.
Yeah, so I had a friend who was just a mentor in my life. We both went to church here, and she had walked into her house and saw my husband crying on the floor, just kind of in a fetal position, and she knew something was wrong. And so she called me and she said, I'm coming over. And before I could say no, she hung up the phone, and I wanted to say no. I just wanted to be alone. And so she walked through my door, and we sat on the couch as I started to explain to her the things that had taken place and what I was thinking. And that's kind of where the conversation shifted, and she took over from there, and she started asking me questions like, did I love him? And my tongue was stuck to the roof of my mouth. I wanted to say no, and I went to say no, and literally my tongue froze, and I couldn't say I didn't love him. And then she asked, we had two pictures of our kids sitting right next to us on this table, and she said, the enemy wants nothing more than these kids to be a statistic of divorce. And she started asking questions that took me back to my childhood. And I remember not having my dad and these things. And I was like, oh, heck no, the enemy doesn't get to win. And so she looked at me at the end of this conversation and she said, you're going to fight. And I'll tell you, at the beginning, I was very upset at that. I didn't receive that well. I wanted to be like, who are you to tell me I'm going to fight? I wasn't the one that made this decision. And so she left that day or that night, and I knew that it wasn't her, that it was God that was telling me these things. And so I remember picking up my kids, and I was literally just crying, and I'm like, God, you don't know what you're asking me. I can't do this. And this was like this pattern of abandonment. I didn't have my dad, and then my stepfather and I had issues, and then now the person that I committed to had made these things, and I had the right to leave. And so I knew biblically I was released from my marriage, yet I heard the Lord asking me to stay. And so that night, I just remember like crying out. Plum had a song. Music's really how I relate often by worship music. And so Plum had a song that I need you now. And I just remember crying out to the Lord, I need you now. And if you're asking me to fight, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but you obviously do. And so you've got to meet me with a step. I'll take one step, but that's all I have in this. And so he was faithful, because what looked like crawls started to become steps, and then they started to become walking, and we started to do this thing together. But at the beginning, it was really messy.
Yeah. One thing that I'm curious about is like the first conversation that you had with Paul after those.
Yeah, so we had a conversation together, kind of like, how are we going to do this? Or what does this look like? And I, with tears coming down my eyes, said, God told me that I'm going to fight. And I see a release in him, like, oh my gosh, like, and I said, I just keep hearing the Lord say, if he's forgiven me, how can I not forgive you? And so I knew the gospel. I knew that Christ loved me. I knew that he forgave me. I knew I had my own stuff. And so I just felt like the Lord said, Liz, I've forgiven you. Will you walk out forgiveness for him? And I even just knew as I walked out forgiveness that the Lord had something for Paul.
Man, that's obedience.
It's God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's a process. Like, tell me about this process because so many marriages already are failing. And this is, I think, very valuable to people to hear how, even in such a horrible situation, you guys found a way to actually win and restore a marriage. So, how did you?
The first couple weeks or months were hard because I was like, God, I don't love him um, in a love that I used to. It felt like it was an emotional love at that time. And so I remember praying, God, if I can't love him, you've got to love him through me. That was one of the early prayers that I prayed that I think was life changing for me at that moment. The other one was the hardest one was, God, if you're not going to change him, then change me. And so I knew what I had promised to the Lord. I didn't promise that to Paul at first. I knew what God was asking me to do. And so really my oath at that time was to walk with the Lord, and Paul would have to do whatever he was going to do. It was going to be Paul and God on his walk. And so I really dug deep into my word. I really dug deep into prayer. I really prayed prayers of like, God, when he's unlovable, help me love him through me. Those were the things. And I really think my dependence on God was where he got us to the point of where those slow walks became more of a regular walk, and then us just doing life together. But Paul was also very intentional about his relationship with the Lord, about he was hungry for the Lord. In that time of me telling him, because Christ had forgiven me for the things I had done, that I would forgive him. He came to know the Lord within 6 weeks and desired a relationship with God. And so that was the first thing of God's faithfulness that I saw from such a dark moment is I now had a husband who understood what a relationship with the Lord was. And there's a joke that I'm like, okay, God, if you're going to fix him, no one else gets the good part of him. I just got to see the Lord work in his life at the beginning. And so Paul started making changes over the course of time that made it easy to lean into what the Lord was doing.
How has your family and his leadership changed? Because you said like you were seeking like his leadership. Like, how has that changed?
Yeah. From the time of praying 5 years into our marriage, God, I need a spiritual leader, never knowing what we would walk through to get there. But to see the man that he is today, to see the relationship he has with the Lord, to see even the better father that he is today, when he was a good father back then, there's a difference in our marriage. There's a difference in our relationship, even how we connect together as a couple. Definitely with Christ, there's an intimacy in our relationship that we never had before. And it's just been neat to watch how the Lord has worked through him to lead our family.
How many years has it been?
I said 12 years. He says 13. It was 2012 and we're 2025 now, so 13 years.
And, now looking back, one question I always like to ask is, this is a tough one, but especially in your case, what are you most thankful for that, like, the Lord has done through this?
One, I'm most thankful for just the renewing and restoring of our marriage. Never knowing, God always knows the desires of our heart. And Paul and I both come from brokenness, broken families. And yet not being able to see what healthy looked like, yet God restoring and renewing what this new family is now, that is centered around him, that's built on the foundations of who he is, has changed everything for us and the girls.
What would you say to a married couple who's considering divorce, but they're also considering fighting for the marriage and they're just weighing it? What would you say to a couple like that?
I would say lean into God. Um, and to go back to seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, and all these things shall be added. Um, during those times for me, um, and God asking me to walk through this hard time, I just leaned into, okay, God, well, then you're going to have to do a work in me while you're working in Him. And so you can't make somebody change. I wasn't going to make Paul change. There was nothing I could do um, to make him change. He had to have wanted it, and it was God through him. But why I waited in these times to see if he was going to be a different person, that's when the Lord started to do a lot of work in my own life to reveal things that I needed to change, or that I had been holding on to what an expectation looked like, and trying to do all these things to control a situation, whether it be marriage, whether it be the expectation of what I thought marriage was, to realize these things still happen no matter how much control I had. Um, God started to reveal these things I had to give up, or that I saw as these idols or securities in my life. Yet instead of seeking Him.
Tell me how the Lord has used this situation and led you guys now to help others and lead others, and you can share about your ministry.
Yeah, through this situation, we've seen how God has just used our story with other couples. That was the big thing. I told you that I was seeking somebody who had been through it, that could tell us that they had been through it and that they had come out on the other side. And when we didn't have that, it was almost like a quiet prayer to promise God that if you see me through this, we will be those people for somebody else. And so we've kept to our word, because God could definitely kept to His word more, far greater than what I could have even imagined. And so I'm honored. I'm humbled, but it is definitely a blessing to be able to get a front row seat into other people's lives of how the Lord's working in their lives, and to also just be a story of hope of saying, this is what He did for us. He can do it for you as well.
Tell me about the birth of the ministry.
The birth of the ministry was pretty organic. We just started to open up our home and started to walk through couples through hard situations. It was through walking with those couples through hard situations that we started to realize that marriage issues usually surface as one thing, but there's a lot deeper rooted issues, usually from childhood or different traumas that they've walked through. That surface as whatever that they're experiencing at that time. And so we just started praying to God, what does this look like in helping these people? And these are the issues that are presenting themselves, but there's so much deeper rooted issues here. And so and Paul felt like God said, go to the deepest parts go to the roots. And so we really just started opening up, of working with lots of people who had gone through brokenness, trauma, or pain. Those were kind of their stories. And a high-risk adult, and that is somebody who is often overlooked or needing a second chance. And so that's where our heart was pulled, and that's what organically started happening. So it got a name called Love Remained Ministries, and that's where God's love remained when man's did not, because that was our story. I'm Liz, and I'm captivated and changed by Jesus.